Today we're going to make bulkheads. So if you remember in the last segment, I cut the dados for the bulkheads. And here's the panel, and you can see the dados that are cut. So this is for the kind of the upper countertop. Here's where the lower countertop is, and this is then the bulkhead that separates this cabinet from the inside of the teardrop. And then this one also has a cabinet out here, but this is separating, again, the back section from the inside of the teardrop. So what I've got to do is I've got to build up the bulkheads that fit into these slots. So what I'm making them out of is 8-inch birch plywood, and then this is 1 by 3, which is a true dimension of about 2.5 by 3/4. So and this is poplar. The reason I chose poplar is pretty stable and straight, and sometimes it takes a little while to get back to the work, and so I don't want things warping on me. So I use poplar. It's a little bit more expensive, but I like working with it. So what I will do first is I will take these poplar boards, and I've already cut these to length with my chop saw, and I'm going to use my Craig pocket hole jig. I'm going to make pocket holes in all of these, screw this together. You probably wouldn't have to make pocket holes, but I'm a sort of a belt and suspenders kind of guy, and so I like having the extra security, and it also really squares the frame up real well. I will use the piece of plywood itself as my square edge, and when I'm laying it out and when I'm doing the pocket holes. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to set up the pocket hole jig. Okay, in order to set up the pocket hole jig, the case for the pocket hole jig comes in actually has the setups built into it, and hopefully you can see this, but this is the special drill bit that it comes with. So it's a special drill bit, and there's a collar on this drill bit that has a little Allen screw on it right here. So what you can do is you can loosen that, and you can see there's some writing on here, and so it's at different lengths, 1/2 inch all the way up to 1.5 or so, something like that. So this is 3/4 inch material, and I'm going into 3/4, so I set this for 3/4. So I just move this slider up here, tighten that down. And then on the jig itself, which is this part right here, you can see here on the bottom, hopefully you can see there, that these gray parts right here can slide back and forth. And this also says 3/4 right here. Hopefully you can read that. So I can slide these back to 3/4. So I've set that up, and so now my pocket jig is set up, and I just clamp the board in place and go ahead and drill it. And I will go ahead and do that. So you just kind of center that on the board, clamp it down. There's one. Done. I really like this jig. It works real well, and when you screw it all together, it's a real nice tight square joint. Okay, I've got them all drilled and laid out. So what I did is just clamp this down to the plywood to help straighten it out. The plywood's got a little bit of a bow in it. Used a sandbag to do the same thing on the back side. This is where they will all go. Made some marks. So this one is centered in the frame here, and made sure that my bottom edge here is all perfectly flush, and my left edge is perfectly flush. And then there's a little driver that they provide with the tool. and get some screws. I'm using 1¼ screws, one each. I want to make sure that this one is lined up right here with the edge of the plywood. Hold a little pressure on it. And that's perfect. Just exactly the way it's supposed to be. Now I'll do the same thing with this one up here at the top. You can see how it draws that joint together. So that one's done. I'll do that to the rest of the frame, and then we'll go to the next step. So now I'll just trace the outline of the frame on the plywood. And then I will take this off and get ready to cut the plywood. So I've brought some insulation up here. This is just basically my cutting surface, my sacrificial cutting surface. And then here's the plywood. Now you can see this plywood's pretty bendy here, and that's just because it's been sitting in the shop here for a couple weeks. This plywood definitely has a grain to it, which I will use to my advantage when I'm putting the roof on. But it looks like it wants to bend this way, but it really doesn't. The direction it likes to bend is like this. And you can see how easy that is to bend. So, so for the purposes of these bulkheads, I'm going to put that bendy direction here crossways. And I'm going to have it to where it wants to stay straight, or at least reasonably straight, lengthwise. So I think that's where it needs to be. So hopefully that's the right decision. So what I'm doing here is I will use my my little trim saw. My trim saw has an offset of 4 inches from the edge of the blade to the side here. So I'm going to use the frame as my guide, and I'll set this at 4 inches, actually a little bit more because I would rather have a little bit extra there, which I can plane off later. And I'll clamp this down and then run it along the side, and hopefully it'll give me a nice straight line, and this panel we'll cut this panel out. Okay, I set the saw up so it just barely goes through the bottom of the plywood. You got to be really careful because you got to pull the guard up here. Get it going. And that's done. I'll cut the end off and I'll make another one. Okay, I've got my panels cut and kind of put together here. Now with the 1/8 inch plywood, and it's still kind of warpy here, but with the 1/8 inch plywood, it's a little bendy. So, you know, there's a little problem here with where this void is in my frame. So the solution is to take 3/4 inch insulation panels, put it inside, glue it all up. That'll also add some stiffness to the frame because then it becomes a stress skin torsion box, and that's very strong and stiff. So that's the next thing I will do. is we'll cut insulation to go in this frame. Alright, so for the exercise here of cutting the insulation, basically took a square edge and kind of lined that up with the inside of this thing here. So, got my frame, and I just get my knife. And start cutting. Now, once I get the initial cut done, I can remove this, take my knife, and it'll kind of follow the line. Be careful. There we go. Now that should, and I got to cut this little tongue off here. This is the tongue and groove on the insulation. And that should be a nice tight fit. That's what I want. Alright, so I've got them both cut, so what I've got is a real nice, tight, lightweight frame here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the panels on either side of it, and this will be done with the exception of just some trimming and then the varnish. Alright, it's time to put the glue on here, so I'm going to be putting a fair amount of glue on here pretty quickly. I've got to do this side and then I've got to do the other side. Titebond sets up, you got maybe 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more of open time before you really need to start putting the stuff together. So you're working pretty quickly. I may actually just pour it right out of this Titebond container. We'll just see how fast this goes on with the small container. I also got this little notched silicone squeegee here. Nice thing about this is you can get it all covered with glue, and once it dries it just peels right off of there, which is pretty neat. So I'm going to go ahead and get going on that. A little bit more glue. About out of time here. So that's about as good as I think I'm going to get it. We'll just leave that for 24 hours, come back, and do the next one.